Welcome to Soul Elevation, guiding your ascension to new heights. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin. I just finished recording this episode with Leo Mars, and I'm still buzzing. We had a really exciting discussion around consciousness, starting with his spontaneous spiritual awakening. Leo's path has taken him down both philosophical as well as grounded and practical paths to expanding his consciousness, and you get a flavor of both in this episode. I particularly loved what he shared about the psychedelic-like experiences he's had via breathwork and how his Ethr app can assist you in experiencing this for yourself. Leo Mars is a founder, philosopher, and consciousness explorer who bridges spiritual wisdom with practical creation in the emerging meaning economy. Raised in the wilds of Alaska, Leo's path has spanned from award-winning entrepreneur to breathwork pioneer and founder of Ethr, a platform for nervous system regulation through active breathing. His guiding philosophy, evolution by intelligent design, emerged from a life-changing consciousness expansion at age 27. Blending ancient wisdom with futurist insight, Leo's work explores how presence, natural intelligence, and conscious creativity can shape both personal and creative evolution. And in this episode, we talk about the human technological possibilities relating to visualization, which is really fascinating timing for me as I have just released, as of the recording of this, a new Earth meditation, which you can get for free on karagoodwin.com. Look under the free resources section for this 12-minute meditation, which will help you focus in on a powerful future state which, through your imagination, you can magnetize into our reality. As more of us collectively tune into a brighter, healthier future for our planet and all sentient life here, we accelerate its arrival. Leo and I discuss this further in the episode, so let's get into it right now. Enjoy this episode. Well, welcome, Leo. I'm really excited to meet you and get to talk today about consciousness and all of the many topics that you bring to the table. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's do this.
So I want to start with your life-changing consciousness expansion experience. Let's talk about what made you, what caused this focus on consciousness and all of the topics that you are interested in now.
That's a great place to start because really that's where I would say like my real life path seemed to have begun. At the time I was 27 years old, and this was kind of the big awakening, the biggest one I've had yet. At the time I was running a nightclub and 4-star restaurant in Denver. I was very kind of caught up in materialism and entrepreneurship and money and recognition. I was visiting my father in Alaska for about a week, just kind of getting away from my life and taking a little break. And it was about 6:45 in the morning. I'm in the shower, and out of nowhere, I slipped into an altered state of consciousness. Completely, sober. I had never at that time, I had never used any form of psychedelics, mushrooms, or anything like that. And I would say I was probably in the state for maybe a couple of minutes before I became aware of what was happening. When I started, so it was essentially a state of thoughtlessness. In retrospect, I can see that it was probably the first time I had ever experienced a state of total thoughtlessness. And I think that was probably really I don't know if it was probably the mechanism of action, if you will, that provided this very, profound experience. When I became aware of what was happening, I was kind of just staring at the shower curtain, kind of fluttering, almost like in a trance, just staring like through the shower curtain. It felt as though all I had ever known was the bottom of the deepest ocean. And I had the pressure and just like way. So the contrast was that all I had known was the bottom of the deepest ocean, and I had somehow spontaneously shot up to the surface and taken this, first gasp of air. As I started to become aware of it, it started to kind of dilate. So it was like as my brain began to go, what is going on here? I could feel it contract. And it was so kind of precious that I had never really had any form of spiritual practice or meditation training or really mind training. I was able to relieve my thoughts about it and expand back into the state. The qualities of the state were that of expansiveness. Essentially, my sense of self wasn't located in this body. It wasn't an out of body experience. I was still, looking through my eyes, but it was as though my sense of self was permeating my perception. So filling the bathroom, beyond the walls of the bathroom, beyond the walls of the house, beyond the stratosphere of the earth, filling the entire spectrum of my perception. One of the only other qualities other than that, like really kind of like, just that like sense of almost like genie out of the bottle, just like, oh my gosh, wow, was a sense of, it was a knowing that I could kind of just effortlessly exhale a universe into existence. This sense of really profound creativity and potency. And it's not something that quality is something in the early days I would reference when talking about the experience, but it's actually been probably a decade since I've remembered that part of it. And I think it's actually probably even more profound and relevant to my ilk sense than the expansion and the sense of I am, that sense of creativity and potency. So I expanded back into that state for maybe another 2 minutes. And I had somehow, I guess I had the intuition. I knew like, okay, like I'm going to go back into my ordinary state now. And so what I did, I've kind of got a history of doing this from the time I was a little kid. I'll tag the trees, if you will. You know how like if you're lost in the woods, like you want to create reference points. So I kind of seared it into my brain. I said, Leo, never forget this is possible in this life. And kind of went back into my ordinary state. Yep. Finished my shower, got out of the shower. I was drying off, and I noticed the towel against the flesh of my leg, and I went, oh, that just happened. And I fell to the bathroom floor weeping in joy. Just like, oh my gosh, it is a new world.
Wow. I love how you bring the child, like you touched on the child, aspect of part of that, where it's like, okay, this is what I've done since I was a child in order to remember things. But what I was getting also while you were talking about this, because I haven't had like the same experience, but I've had experiences like that. And there's always a remembrance element to it of like being a baby. And it's not necessarily like I distinctly remember being a baby, but there is this link of a remembrance of this is what it's like. This is what it was like before I learned how to be in this society and how to be like my own person. It was just experience, like literally just moment to moment. This is what this moment is. And there's no judging of it. There's just response and there's just observation. And that's what it's just such a beautiful experience to be able to have. And it, to me, harkens back to the purity and the innocence. And I feel that that's such a big part of my path, at least speaking for myself, is going back to the innocence of being a child, remembering the remembering of like, oh my gosh, this is what it was like. And that's so pure, and it's so close, it's so close. It's so much a part of who we are as well. Yeah.
I feel you. It seems like it's always a remembering, even like reading, great, let's say philosophy or metaphysics or cosmology. To me, it's always like, well, I knew this, like this resonates with my knowing, that remembering. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So where did that take you in terms of you have this experience, but it's such a contrast to what you're used to in your everyday life when you're in Denver. How did things keep progressing to where breath work became part of it? You started understanding the role
Yeah.
of the nervous system and
Yeah.
and myth and all of this. Like where did it take you?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And, really the next day, this was in 2009, the following day, I was on Google and I don't remember what my search was, but I had no context. So it had to have been some kind of like, WTF just happened to me. I didn't know, like, I'm trying to like check my brain and see if like I haven't gone crazy or something. And I stumbled upon the work of an American philosopher named Ken Wilber. Are you familiar with Ken's work, Integral
That
Theory?
sound what was that? Sorry.
Integral Theory?
I don't think so. But Ken Wilber sounds familiar, but I haven't gone deep into it if I've come across it.
Yeah. So yeah, I found this integral theory, and basically I found there's an aspect of this model. It's essentially a theory of everything. It's a meta theory, and kind of by and large considered to be the most comprehensive meta theory. It literally, Ken at the age of about 14 had this deep knowing that like nobody, he says it this way, he says, nobody is smart enough to produce 100% error. And so
That's
he spent a
intriguing.
lifetime, very intriguing, yes. So it is a mammoth of an academic meta theory that is, he's developed over the last 50 years of writing. But in integral theory, there's this part of integral theory that talks about states and stages. And essentially what integral theory is a synthesis of developmental models, more or less. And so it's in the states and stages conception, it's basically referencing a combination of spiral dynamics and something that's now called the Wilber-Combs matrix. But basically what the states and stages concept is that it says that states, all of the human states that we describe, like throughout, the millennia, are ever present. Almost like, as you were saying earlier, like it's already there. It's a remembering. It's before the personality, before the ego, before thought. So states are more, you could think of them as horizontal, and they're accessible to all of us. They're
So give an
primary.
example of a state.
Well, you could say like, I like to use like that shower experience, I view as a non-dual experience. And, anytime that we have a thought, really a thought, it provides a kind of reference point in our consciousness that creates a sense of this versus that. You could say like, the Garden of Eden, we ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and thus we began to feel a separation with nature. So, Buddha nature, there's all sorts of different descriptions. Turyatita, what I experienced in the shower would be considered like a kensho in Zen Buddhism. Christ consciousness, pure love, I am, and there's so many different variations of that. And so we can experience these states regardless of our developmental stage, but we will interpret them through the lens of our stage. So you can think of stages as like vertical, in this case, holarchical or sequential kind of levels of development.
And when you talk about
And
development, or when he talks about development, that would be in regards to like spiritual development.
and typically, like, so one of the things integral theory draws on are lines of development. So spiritual would be one of, in Ken's view, at least 26 concrete lines of development. So spiritual would be defined in that model, would be considered having to do with matters of ultimate concern. Who am I, or what am I? Where did I come from? Where did we come from? What's happening here? Where's it all going? How do I live a good life?
And
These
what would be
kind of
some
considered.
other developmental stages as examples?
Yes. And so all of these lines are essentially moving through stages. And you'll see that if you were to look up integral theory on, Google Images, you would see concentric circles, you would see quadrants, and then you would see lines moving through those. So other lines would be like, and to speak to your question about like spiritual development, that would be an aspect. The kind of primary lines, or you could say like the leader lines in these, and particularly in spiral dynamics, would be values, cognition. Cognition is generally considered to be the leader line. So, and cognition in that model is defined as what I am aware of being aware of, what I know that I know. And typically, the reason why cognition is considered the kind of governor line is because you kind of first have to be aware of something before you can really do anything about it. And often, like it'll take, for example, and now tying it back to what happened afterwards, I went back to my nightclub, and it was in like maybe 5 weeks. It was going to be St. Patrick's Day. And this was when like greening your restaurant was not trendy. It was not like, I'd never heard of someone else doing it. And what I did is I told my staff, we're going to spend the next month greening the venue, and we're going to throw a going green party.
What do you mean by greening? Is that like ecologically?
Yes. Okay. So I was shifting from basically egocentric, materialistic, empirical kind of scientism, strive drive in spiral dynamics to this postmodern, it's actually using the color green in spiral dynamics. So environmentalism, my circle of care, you could say, had widened to include the planet. And that experience in the shower was the kind of trigger for that widening.
Okay.
So yeah, I threw a going green party for St. Patrick's Day. My staff was like, all right, man, like Leo's gone a little crazy, but like we'll go with it. It wasn't cool. So it wasn't like nobody was upset about it, but they're like, okay, whatever, man. We brought in composting bins in the back and recycling and started using, so we totally re-engineered the menu, started sourcing locally.
Well, it's fascinating because this happened around St. Patrick's Day. And I know that, we've got listeners from around the world. And so not everybody's like entrenched in what we do in America. And I'm guessing also in Ireland. But there is, green is a big color with St. Patrick's Day. You've got, green beer, green fountains, like depending on how into it different people are or cultures are. So it's just really funny, this whole like, oh, we're going green. I'm sure your staff is like, okay, green beer or green food items. And then it's like, nope, we're going bigger than that. So it's fascinating.
Yeah. Started bringing in herbal infused vodkas, hosting free candlelit yoga on Wednesday nights in the top floor of the venue. Yeah, so it was a really strange kind of transition. And thankfully, I got a call from some restaurateurs out of New York that were had been visiting the venue when they came through town and kind of initiated a sale. They said, we want to buy it. Ultimately, my partners kind of bought me out of that. But that sent me on a journey to really go deep. I got a one-way ticket to Argentina and spent several months on the beaches of kind of, and jungles of South and Central America, reading like Joe Dispenza and metaphysics and stuff, trying to figure out, what to do from here. But to be honest, that really kind of threw me into a pretty deep depression. And I can see now, I didn't have any ground underneath me anymore. I didn't have a persona to lean on or to identify with. So I went into a very deep state of confusion for several years. It took me a long time to figure out my way from there. I ended up spending, kind of getting invited into this philosopher's life and spending quite a bit of time with him in his home, with his assistants and editors, and getting kind of like a direct transmission. Was very interested, always compelled by creativity. To me, it's like creativity is one of the primary ways that you could say like we make love to the universe or we participate with, the cosmos. So creativity has always been very deep to my perspective. And then breath came along in 2015. I was invited to a breathwork class in Venice, California, and had gone through a couple of periods of pretty intense, like psychedelic use, where I would like fast for 24 hours and then do a heroic dose of, mushrooms or LSD in my own personal space. And was really excited to find something that was not, external. I didn't have to ingest it or pay the price of, lost sleep or digestive issues, and still have these like profound, revelatory, transcendent experiences. So several years later,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, just several years later, I'm just trying to wrap up because this is a very long-winded answer to your question.
No,
but
it's all
several
very
years
good.
later, opened the breath studio.
Oh,
3 years
awesome.
later.
So let's talk about that. It's fascinating when you talk about how you are reaching altered states of consciousness through psychedelics and then finding that you could do that through breath work. I'd love to hear more about how, like, what types of breath work do you find most helpful in reaching altered states? What type of breath work do you practice on a day-to-day basis? What can you share with us about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. My ilk is kind of toward the what I would consider like transformative breath work, where you're laying down. I rarely do breathing practices sitting up, laying down, and doing like at least like you can get to some pretty wow places in under a minute if you sequence the breathing right. But I prefer the kind of like 4 to 45 minute rhythmic.
4 to 45. That's a big range.
It is a big range. Yeah. Well, for me, it has a lot to do with time.
Yeah.
If I'm short on time, I'll do a 4 or 8 minute kind of sequence. But yeah, for me, it's laying down. It's always a rhythm. And I've come to believe, I used to kind of have different theories about why is it doing this? I really think that it has more to do with the rhythm kind of evening out the static of our stressful modern life. That is kind of a doorway into meditation and into a state of stillness, more or less. So yeah, I prefer I'll do a combination. Like my daily practice is kind of similar to a Wim Hof style breath. I have in my app, my breathing app, I have they're called flows, and essentially it's stacked sequences of connected breathing with kind of specifically kind of designed holds that will create a kind of cleansing, a washing of the nervous system. But I'm also very much a fan of, and at the studio, the almost the only type of breath that we did was a holotropic breathing. So belly, chest, release, laying down, belly, chest, release. I'm sure you've probably done that, right? Mm-hmm. For 30 plus minutes. And that's when you really get into the deep, it can be emotional release or ecstasy, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, it can make your hands do funny things. Like one of the side effects for me, I've experienced like my hands going numb and kind of like they just like lift up on their own and they're like all kind of frozen, it feels like. And it's like, what is happening with my hands? There was another time I was doing it and, we were all in a circle and I could have sworn that somebody was holding my hands. And I was like, there was only one facilitator. And I'm like, there are people crying in here. There are people I hope that she doesn't feel that she needs to keep holding my hand. Like she can attend to other people. And then I found out afterwards she'd never touched my hand. I was like, well, who was holding my hand? Because then I thought, I asked the person next to me, I'm like, oh, were you holding my hand? She's like, no, I never held your hand. But it did feel like you were holding my hand too, or somebody was. So it's
I get
amazing.
it. The lobster claw.
Yes, the lobster. So that's a known
Yeah.
a known phenomenon, I guess.
And that's actually a result of basically we're off-gassing, let's see here, off-gassing CO2. So is it oxygen or CO2? What's wild about the breath is that different sequences will do different things. So I believe that's the off-gassing of, that's actually the lowering of oxygen, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But, sometimes like for the longest time, I thought like, oh yeah, we're like hyper oxygenating the blood. But the truth is typically we're actually off-gassing CO2 and we're basically reducing oxygen in the blood.
I know like the blood has a very low tolerance for its pH threshold. So that we change the pH of the blood and it kicks off all of these processes within the body to cleanse and do all sorts of things. It's all very mysterious. So how can people, because you mentioned your app, so it sounds like you have tools that people can access this type of your knowledge and the practices that you share, that they can maybe access this in their own time at home. Tell us about the app and the opportunities there.
Yeah. So, yep. So I've got an app called Ethr, ETHR. Basically it's the best of what I know of what breathing can do. And it's really designed to be accessible for anyone, really any age. It's very easy to follow. The guidance is very simple and clean. And you can, there's a 7-day trial available. You can go to ether.one, ethr.one. And there's a free 7-day trial there so they can check it out. But really it's designed, there's like two different types of breathing in there. One is what are called flows, and that's essentially what I do on a daily basis. That's what I do before. I didn't have time today to do it before chatting with you, but typically I would have done that before chatting with you and got into my center, kind of washed off any nervous energy or any tension that I'm holding on to. And then the other part are what are called shifts, and those are very unique types of breathing. It's a kind of a robust library and growing, different. Anywhere from like 5 minutes. There's one called 0 point descent, which is like my favorite breath to do before sleep. It's like a 5-minute breath and it will just poof, like newborn baby vibes, send you into very deep sleep, but all the way into like, longer 35, 40-minute deeper sessions. But yeah, they can check it out at ether.one and do a 7-day trial.
That's awesome. And is there like a holotropic breathing? Is that part of it, or?
Yep. Yeah, there are a number of different sessions in there that are employing the 3-part breath, the holotropic breath.
Which is more conducive to like for people who want to reach altered states or explore the breath in terms of its abilities to connect them more spiritually.
Actually what's wild is that I always kind of felt like some of the sequences, like I actually get to some pretty wild states with the flows, those daily flows, because the timing of the way that it's designed, you will access altered states with those daily flows, and really I would say all of them. I would say like in the Ethr app, the 3-part holotropic breath is going to be more about like processing emotions or working through something challenging in life, or just kind of wanting to unearth some deeper stuff.
Okay. So let's just, if you think off the top of your head, some of the flows that listeners, like if they're like, oh my gosh, I don't necessarily need to take mushrooms. How can I use this app to help me? What are a few of the flows or a couple of the flows that you would recommend for people to try?
Let's see. So there's, so again, the flows are the daily practices, and those kind of goes from like 4 minutes up to, I think the longest one is 25 minutes. And that really will help you also kind of build your VO2 max, or more or less like your cardiovascular health. So it gets progressively challenging. The holds get progressively longer. So that's a good way to kind of like build a daily practice and improve cardiovascular health. So the other, that other section is the shifts. There's a couple in particular that I really enjoy. One is called System Reset, and I want to say that's 20 minutes. And there is another one. There's another one.
I think Cosmo endorses that one too. He's like,
yeah, he wanted to
yeah.
tell the listeners. There's another one called, it starts with an M. It's slipping my mind off the top of my head. But really what's in there, in those shifts, those are the most potent sequences I've found over the course of 7 years of practicing breathwork and doing all the different YouTube breathworks and having literally hundreds of facilitators come through my studio. So yeah, I honestly am an advocate of all the sequences there.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I know that you also, one of your passions is work as a futurist. So, or your one of your interests. First of all, what do you mean by futurist?
Yeah, I would say, and that's kind of a tricky like passion to have in a way, as someone who's very like I consider myself a mystic, and I understand the importance of presence and being in the moment. I think for me as a creator, as a kind of almost to a fault, I have an eros that is just I cannot stop moving, stop building and creating. It can be really challenging. Like how do you live in the present and create change in the future and anticipate a future? So that's something that came online just after the experience in the shower. I came across a lecture from Deepak Chopra on YouTube, and he was telling the group in the room, he's like, look, like I know, many of us want to be Luddites or neo-Luddites, and like technology is synthetic, it's not natural, it's destroying, society. Certainly social media has had some negative impacts on society. But it's not going anywhere. And you guys in this room, if you aren't engaging technology, we will go to live into a dystopian future. And so for me, like the interest in what is unfolding came online, combination of when I saw that from Deepak, and that just resonated, made sense. And then also discovered kind of the world of futurism and technology through Ray Kurzweil's work. I read the book, The Singularity is Near, and it's like, wow, we've got until like 2030, 2032 for all of this to happen. And if I'm not participating or employing these technologies, then we're going to have, everyone else in, China and bad actors, and we're going to have to counter that. We're in a bit of a spiritual war on some level. I don't necessarily see it as like a war. I see it as light and darkness doing their dance as they've always done.
Yeah. Well, and so when you think about being a futurist, is that always centered around technology? Because it's really an interesting timing that we happen to be recording this at this time, because last week I put out a free new earth meditation, and it's really about utilizing our creative power, our visualization power, or our ability to imagine a future. And what does that look like? And I didn't even go into the technology. Like I'm talking about like picture the skies, like the skies are free and clear, and they're, bright blue, the water is clean, and the sea life is thriving and prolific, and the land is healthy, and the mineral kingdom is, and just keep going with like, what is our strongest future? And let's tune into that. And then let's use our creative power to say, this is what reality is. And we pull that in and let the universe kind of work the details out, and maybe we're a part of how, for some people, they will be a part of how we get there. And for others, like that's not where their skill set is, but they're very strong creators in terms of consciousness. So I really love this perspective as well of technology and utilizing technology and how our participation in it creates it, helps to create it. But can you talk a little bit more about technology and how that plays in?
Yeah, absolutely. And that sounds like an amazing visualization practice. I would love to know, where can I go do that?
Yeah. It's just on my website, which is karagoodwin.com. It's just a free offering. So I think there's just a little link at the bottom. In fact, it might just bring up a pop-up that says just, here you can get it here.
I'm going to go do that. That
okay,
sounds
awesome. Yeah, thank you.
And actually, so the visual space has been very central to the development of my own kind of frameworks and design philosophy. It's to me, it's very clear that, in fact, I think visualization is going to be one of the biggest, let's say, technologies in the, personal development, conscious evolution space. And
so you mean the ability for people to visualize within their own creative flow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And particularly because we know, and this is going to sound a little technical for a second, but the center of prehension of any system, you could say the nucleus or the brain, the nervous system, dictates the use of resources of that system, and over time changes the physical topography of that system. So I've always had an inclination towards the evolution of consciousness. If I can do one thing, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to spend my life cleaning up the oceans, because that is an affect. That is a downstream byproduct of shifts in consciousness, shifts in perspective, stages of development. So I'm going to put my energy into the evolution of consciousness, of perspective. And so I do believe that, in fact, visualization is something, if I had 48 hours in the day, I would be moving this forward a lot faster. But I think visualization is probably one of the most powerful technologies. In fact, there's a sociologist who's now long passed. There's a very rare textbook that is out of print called The Image of the Future. And he said, when the dominant images of a society are anticipatory, they lead social development and provide direction for social change. They have, as it were, a magnetic pull towards the future.
Oh, I've got chills. I mean, that's exactly what I've said in all of the, where I'm like, please get this and use it so we can magnetize this future, because we're creating whether we mean to or not. So, and I had a beautiful friend of mine who's a very talented author and writer, and she downloaded it and did it last night, and I got a text from her, and she's like, oh my God, thank you. I never think to use my imagination in this way. It's like I love to imagine, but I forget that I can use it to like imagine an amazing future, and I was like, well, I'm glad that you're turned on to this now, because you do have such a powerful imagination. And the more powerful our imagination is, the more we're calling in what we're thinking about.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And that, that ties into where we're at in, technological evolution, because we're, the power and the impact is floating to the imagination. It's all about the prompt. What can you, essentially whatever you can imagine can be real. And we're within, 8 years of that being 100% true. Where we used to say, to kids or even adults, you'd say like, if you could do anything and, let's say money wasn't an issue or you knew you wouldn't fail, what would you do? This is becoming totally real. So that to me is the most advanced technology right now, is imagination. And there's also one key element that I think we miss in pop, kind of like, let's just call it like new age spirituality or postmodern spirituality, and that is plausibility. So if you're imagining something that is like, let's say it's just a little too far out for you to really believe it, likely of you being able to kind of follow through on that, or let's say manifest that into your world, is going to go down the less probable it is. So I've learned that one of the keys is imagining things in a way that I can believe on like a somatic level. It's like, oh yeah, totally.
Okay, so that's fascinating. So if you can't get like you'd love it, but you can't possibly fathom that it's possible, then it has less power. But if you
Yep.
can,
Yep.
you can bring it a little bit closer to be like, okay, maybe that's too far out right now, but there's something that is closer that you can get on board with, like, okay, I could see that happening. Then
Yes.
that's what you really want to focus on.
Yes.
I
And
love
that will
it.
make it almost practical to man. It's like, boom, done.
Yeah.
There's something that I like to, and maybe I'll share this here because I find it really valuable. I call it the meta question. And basically, like, what I've learned, like being someone who like is almost like, you know, in a way, being super visionary can be a burden, because it's like always this grand utopia in the future, and then going through just like the twists and turns of the process of manifesting a life of work or whatever. I've come to really get to a place where I'm like, just put the next foot in front of the other foot. You can hold that vision, but just right now, don't get overwhelmed by that. Put your next foot in front of the other. What I love to do is called the meta question, and this will essentially unstick you, regardless of what you're dealing with. So anytime that we ask a question, the answer exists. Like by nature of asking the question, we've now essentially created the answer. It's just a matter of when is that answer going to come into our awareness. So one thing I really like to do that kind of supports this kind of process of manifesting in a more practical way. The meta question is, what question, if I asked, would give me an answer that would allow me to move forward in this area of my life? So in my experience, within usually about 48 hours, the right question will arise, and I'll go, okay, and I'll ask that question. And then again, within another usually 24 hours, it's like, boop, okay, cool, I'm unstuck.
Wow.
So that very practical, one foot in front of the other, hold the vision, and hold visions. You can hold those really grand utopian visions for your life and for society, but don't get overwhelmed by them.
That's beautiful. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, and there's a lot on my list that we didn't get to, but I feel like this is a great place to wrap things up. And I would just ask you, we've covered a lot of amazing topics and a lot of ways for people to enrich their lives. But if I ask you, like, what's one key takeaway that you want to leave with somebody who's watching or listening today for them to live a more purposeful life, or to put one foot in front of the other, what comes to mind for you?
I would say presence, being in the moment fully, is the doorway to and the access point of everything we could ever dream of being. Our most intelligent, funny, brilliant, wise, intuitive self is in the moment waiting for us. So use your breath as an anchor, not manipulating the breath, just coming back to the breath to anchor yourself in the moment. Listen to your soma and live from that place.
Beautiful.
That's it.
Good. That's great. So tell people how they can connect with your work and learn more about you.
Yeah, you could go to my main website is leomars with 2rs.com. And then there you'll be able to access the different things I've got going on. I'm writing this book, The New Creator. And I on Saturdays, I send a snippet of that book to my email subscribers so they can sign up for free there if they want early access to the book. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Leo. This has been such a rich discussion. I've really enjoyed talking to you today.
Yeah, same, Kara. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Soul Elevation. Please take a moment to think about someone in your life who might be uplifted or have their curiosity sparked by this content and send it on to them. Let's keep sharing high-frequency, empowering content to reinforce the highest potential for humanity. I also invite you to subscribe to this content. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you for the next episode of Soul Elevation.